We have a few fewer people in the room, so as we're saying here, perhaps we have got competition with another panel. We're not going to do this one in exactly the same style as the last one. There won't be any sort of specific presentations, no need to concentrate on any slides or anything like that. We'll just, in some ways, try to continue on the conversation where we left off. So, as you can see, we've got even more people here, all representing different sorts of creative industries. So, it's going to be a challenge to hear, and hopefully a very interesting discussion to hear what motivates and what frustrates all our different panelists. So let me start here at the end. It's Borie Hansson, founder of Bright Moving Pictures. So we were talking about movie makers and so on. You're going to give us a lot of that. David Wheeldon already asked some provocative questions and made some provocative comments to our last panel. He's the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at B-Sky-B. Janneke Scheuer, I hope my pronunciation is okay, Director of Public Policy Europe for Netflix. Again, we've heard people mentioning Netflix a lot in the last panel, so hopefully you'll be able to put some real meat on the bones of what we were saying. Now, to my left, it's Alexander Scheuer from Deutsche Telekom, and you're the Head of Media Regulations and Policy. So, slightly different take from our other guests here. Alfons Karabuda is a composer, and we can ask him a lot about the artist's position. Pierre Ralman is Director of Marketing and Strategy at Isnio. And finally, Leena Kuusniemi, again, hope my pronunciation is okay, is the Legal Director at Rovio, the maker of the very famous Angry Birds. So I'm going to go across like this and ask you all to give me a very snappy, quick reaction to what you thought of the last panel, where the theme was sort of consumer point of view.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Being a film producer in a small European country, I'm quite amused to hear about the great demand of our products all over Europe. I can tell you it rarely happens, but when it happens, I never experienced any kind of obstacles that are kind of the thematics of this panel. My basic obstacle, professional basic obstacle, is the lack of demand, actually. And why is that? Well, a film or a television series is, in its existence, a unique product. Every time we make a film, it's a new product. It doesn't cope with anything before or after. It's not like sparkling water. And also, it's unique product when it occasionally enters into other markets, because it has to be marketed in another way. It might have to be dubbed, which technically makes it a new work, or at least it has to be subtitled. So for the original version of my Swedish film, there is no demand outside Sweden, and this is, of course, due to lingual problems. And this is the very fundament of the film industry, film and television industry. I'm not only a producer, I'm also a consumer. For the moment, I'm working on a project adapting a Scandinavian book. This book has been sold to 35 countries all over Europe and other parts of the world. Of course, I could get a copy of that book cheaper if I were to buy it in Germany or Italy. Then I can buy it in Sweden. But it's not interesting because it's a different product. I can't read it in Italian. And nobody would ever come to think of the idea to make this, to regulate or demand the market to accept an Italian book in the other countries. So I think that this is the most fundamental thing, is to see what are we talking about in terms of the content here, and not compare it to other more generic products like sparkling water or whatever. That is my basic reflection of the previous panel.
David, microphone.
Thank you. You asked what frustrates me. Well, what frustrated me this morning was the fact that the escalator wouldn't go back up, having gone down, which is why I was late.
That's why the room is not so full.
That's why there's so few people. What else frustrates me? I think what frustrates me sometimes is the dialogue around this area, which is based on some misunderstandings. I mean, I was slightly frustrated, as you probably heard from the intervention of the panel this morning. This is sort of assumption that that the industry is failing to respond adequately to people's demand, to consumers and citizens' demand. That's just not the experience of a business operating at the cutting edge of this industry. Sky, I'm not BSkyB anymore, that doesn't exist. We are all one Sky now, operating in 5 countries in the EU, the UK, Germany, Italy, Ireland and Austria, with 21 million customers, spending billions, about 6 billions of euros on content every year, and distributing it in multiple different ways. We're no longer a single distribution business based around satellite, but we've been running an IPTV business since 2005, so a decade. We are one of the largest distributors of content over the internet in Europe, since the majority of those 21 million customers access it on connected devices. And increasingly we're selling content in multiple different ways, unlocking demand in different ways. So it's no longer the case that you can only buy Sky's content by locking yourself into an annual contract and having somebody come and install expensive hardware in your room. You can now get it in pure OTT forms for weekly, monthly and even 24-hour passes. All of that serving to unlock a huge amount of demand in the markets we're operating in. To give you an example, so the gentleman who suggested that people only wanted to buy one pay TV service, it's just, I mean, that is the biggest load of nonsense I think I've heard in the room today. In the UK, data out yesterday suggested that the number of paid-for services had leapt from 15.6 million last year to 16.6 this. So that's an increase of 1 million in a year, in one of the most competitive markets in Europe. So I think I do get slightly frustrated at the kind of characterization of our industry as being somewhat backward, of not serving consumers, not responding to technology, not keeping up with the Americans. Now that frustrates me. Actually, if you go to America, you will find there are far fewer of the kind of services I just described in the markets there. And indeed, they tend to be behind in terms of their distribution technologies, because the American market actually comes from a different place and has tended to focus on different modes of distribution. We tend in Europe to be ahead of the game in terms of OTT distribution, certainly from our established TV businesses. What doesn't frustrate me is the digital single market strategy. I thought that was an excellent document, some really great things to welcome in there, and some things that, if the Commission is successful in getting them through, will make a difference to the emergence of pan-European services. In particular, I would call out the areas around consumer rules. It is still the case that, and I'm sure that Netflix will experience this, that if you want to launch a pan-European service, you have to offer 28 different terms and conditions to customers. Now that's a problem. That's an issue for big companies. Imagine what it's like for small companies. I also think there's quite a lot in there around creating a bit more of a regulatory playing field, so that the traditional linear TV services are able to compete more with some of the emerging global OTT services. That's not asking for lots more regulation. That's suggesting actually, if we're going to be more competitive, probably ought to have a bit less of it.
Okay. Well, it's been laid out for you.
Well, yes, it has been laid out for me, and I do agree with a number of the points that Mr. Wilman had just made. And I think it's important to realize that Netflix is being mentioned a lot when it comes to DSM strategy. People are very eager to hear our responses about it. And I think it's important to realize that we are now active in 11 EU countries. We are moving to 15 countries in Europe by the end of this year, and probably global availability by the end of 2016. That's really ambitious, and we all achieved it under the current territorial licensing system. So I think when you look at what success factors are for a company like Netflix that has a focus on exclusive content because it wants to have people draw them in with stuff that you cannot find anywhere, or at least you cannot find it for a few days until it emerges at the Pirate Bay. So what frustrated me a little bit was the comment about how piracy shakes up market. I think it was true a few years ago, but currently I think one of the biggest differences between the Pirate Bay and Netflix is that we have closed audio captioning, and we invest this year $3 billion in content, which is something that, well, they obviously do not do. But when it comes to territorial licensing, I think it has not precluded us from succeeding in the European market, because we take out licenses basically for every country where we are, and we secure global licenses because we want to move very quickly to that global stage. When you look at things that do enable that and that are important, I think, well, you emphasized consumer rules that can make it easier to roll out your service and to scale well across Europe, but also audiovisual media services law that allows us to be basically subject to one regulatory regime instead of 28 is something that is a big enabler, and something that we definitely want to keep when we are looking at the DSM reforms. Thanks.
Okay. Alexander, it's slightly different for you. We're talking about over-the-top services. You're from Deutsche Telekom.
Yeah, I probably should explain why I feel or think I have been invited to this, because it might add a specific angle, not being a producer of content, not being a user as such, but rather a platform which tries to bring to consumers different kind of products, also in the audiovisual field. We are partner to Sky, we are partner to Netflix for some of the European markets. So we have to deal with the kind of products as they come, and they come in a way as those aggregators, as I would call them, are able to manage the rights and are able to design and make available their products. So we are a bit more behind in the value chain, if you so want, but perhaps we are a bit closer to the consumer. So I'm not frustrated about what was said about the expectation of consumer, and we try to match that with our products. I would be frustrated if the whole discussion on the reform of the EU copyright regime would end up with the issue of geo-blocking, and nothing else would be debated sincerely, because that would be something which is addressing, to my understanding, one very specific point, but there are numerous others which could help increase access, distribution of works, ease the way that you clear and compensate rights, and so on and so forth. That would be a point of frustration. Just an observation, I'm trying to say it in a neutral way. Having followed the debate for quite some time, frankly, I did not hear many new arguments, many new insights this morning. This might be due that the arguments are still valid. Frustration could come up if you think that, in essence, this is a different debate than the debate which is held at the Commission level at the moment. It might be true that there's a huge interest in maintaining the kind of financing and its sources which have been relevant for film production or other audiovisual works in the past. It might well be that this is a different debate than the debate of making available culture throughout Europe in a more broad way. So that would be something that I would like to attach your attention to. Thanks.
Okay. Alfons, everyone says they want to see you fairly remunerated, so that must make you happy.
Well, I'm glad that this is what they say. It would be nice to see some results in that, of course. But I'm sure that, let me say that, as a creator, we do understand the value of everyone in the cultural and the musical value chain. Everyone that contributes should, of course, have the fair remuneration. Let me just say a few words on the panel before. It's very easy, and it would fit into a tweet if someone wants to. Mr. Leena, if it's bad for the consumers, it's bad for the creators. But if it's bad for the creators, it's bad for the consumers. It's as easy as that. And then we have a lot of people doing great stuff in between. But let me focus on one thing. I think that was the European Vice President for the Digital Single Market, Ansip, that says that Europeans need the right skills to take part in this digital economy. And I totally agree. But how do we know what the right skills are? How do we know which business models actually are long-term sustainable? We don't, because of all the secrecy of the NDAs And I do think that also the consumers need more transparency. They are willing to pay, but I think they would be willing to pay maybe even more, or at least be sustainable in their way of supporting if they knew that the models are sustainable and if they're fair. Today we heard, we talked about fair tax, we've heard about fair use, but I've never heard anyone here, at least today, talk about anything like fair trade. Fair trade music, is that something that could be something that also the consumers would appreciate, I think. So more openness, I think, would help us create a really strong digital single market.
Pierre?
Yes, I wish to react on three topics that were in the first panel. The first one is the question of piracy. The second one is the overall discussion we have here about EU regulation. And the third is the intrinsic value of digital products. Prior to that, I represent Isneo, which is a comic book company, an online comic book company. And we are very proud of being a specific market, not only because the book market is specific from the rest of the audiovisual market, but because inside the book market, comics is very, very specific. It's a growing market. It's a market that adapts very, very well to digital formats like tablets or computers. And at the same time, physical books have a very intrinsic value because they are objects of art. So we don't really envision that digital comics will completely replace physical books, at least not in the 10 years future or something like that, but we do see it growing year after year. So when we, and Isneo, we are an original initiative because we were created by a whole set of the main comic book publishers. So we are a startup from 4 years now with a very, very large catalog. We have no issue of catalog. We have all the catalog of comic books available for publishing on digital with minor exceptions. And we contract with publisher. We really are strong believers of the freedom of contracts with publisher. So with respect to the discussion, I think the provocative statement at the end about piracy is quite interesting because piracy is obviously a problem for everyone. Nobody can say that piracy is forcing companies to, well, maybe that was true for music, forcing companies to shake up their business. But for us in the comic book industry, piracy is a huge problem. However, we did make a distinction in between piracy as a problem and free access to content as part of the business model. We sell series. Large part of what we sell is not one shot. Well, half and half is one shot, half and half is series. As we sell series, we often propose free series. The first volumes being free to encourage people to buy the other. And that's something consumers appreciate a lot because it allows them to see if this series interests them. And from a business perspective, I think it's interesting. As we are online, we're building an ecosystem. In any ecosystem, I think, in the digital world, you will always have free riders. Sometimes people will only stay as free riders, but they will encourage the other. So we're very much used to the idea that we propose some free stuff and then people buy, or we propose some free stuff and people don't buy, but they talk about it. So I think that's something that it's not easy. You have to do it. Try different experience. And what we do is we try to innovate and try as many experiences as possible. Before the end of the year, we're going to try to publish online before the physical book is available offline, publish it, most of its chapters for free. And then it will cease when the physical book is available. Then the physical and the digital book will be paying. That's another way of trying to address this issue of free and piracy. On the second aspect, we're a little scared of the real tendency of the EU trying to discuss on a political level about extending regulations on access to cross territories. We have no problems. Our books are accessible all across Europe. We had one one publisher who didn't want to, and it's finished as July 1st. So this is not a problem for us. But take, for instance, the question of the libraries. We hear that libraries will be allowed to access their books to people outside the walls of the libraries. It could be a good point if it is something that is proposed by online platforms. As a matter of fact, that's what we're going to do, propose this to libraries. But we don't want it to be done on a regulatory basis. We want it to be done on a contractual basis, because that's the only way creators can have a fair revenue from it. It's if it's done on this way, if it's regulated, like allow all libraries to dispatch their content on a landing basis that they will be doing from regulation, I think it's very dangerous. You would go against freedom of contract. And that's from my point of view, quite dangerous. One last point. There was a small part in the discussion this morning about the value, the intrinsic value of digital products. We have to reflect, why do digital products sell for less than physical? They sell for less because there's piracy and people tend to think it's free, so publish with a lower price. But they also sell for less because they have less value, because they are not resellable, because they are not even re-lendable. Who has not ever, why do we buy books, physical books? To lend them to friends also. Why do we buy films? To lend them, to discuss and all that. So the loss of value for digital product is, I think, a real big problem. I think from a technological point of view, there is no issue. It can be really addressed. It's a problem of, then again, I think not of regulation, but it's a problem of contractual discussion with authors and publishers.
Okay, well, I'm sure we're going to pick up on many of those points later. Leena, you had a reaction to the final comment by Nadine in the last panel on piracy and it being a disruptor.
Yeah, maybe I start from that. Well, what is a bit dangerous thing? Yes, I'm a bit of a provocateur, I have to confess that for the start, so I kind of really like shaking the industry, because it's true that people are generally, by instinct, afraid of change, because your first reaction is that, am I going to lose something? Instead of seeing the possibilities that you might gain something. And I'm a bit concerned that if everybody is really like digging deep holes and trying to stay in those positions, so we will have no development. And as somebody mentioned, so the consumers will find a way to get what they want. But going a bit to this creative content, so saying a few words about the games industry. So I would actually claim that the game is a format that has all the possible content in it, even more than a movie, because actually game is an interactive movie, because there's a script, there's text, there are pictures, there are background pictures, there are animations, there are characters, there are logos, trademarks, music, underlying game engine, the code that keeps it going, and you need the network connections. And of course, getting these rights for global distribution can be a real nightmare, and that's maybe a practical solution for many gaming companies is that you do it in-house instead of buying. And I think that is a kind of a pity, because there are a lot of extremely talented artists out there, but the reason you don't reach out for them is that you have this dilemma of getting the sufficient right for your global distribution. And specifically, I mean the musicians, that if you are a member of a collecting society, it might become very difficult to clear those rights for every single country in the world. We have now 2.5 billion downloads of our games and something about 200 million monthly active users. So maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot by saying that yes, it can be done. But it has been rather difficult, and it has led to that we have a biggest animation studio in our headquarters in Finland, in Scandinavia. We also have our own music audio studio, and actually one of the recruiting principles is that when we have a good candidates who can create music or sounds to be used in the games, we ask that, are you independent? So that might be that you don't get the job because you belong to the wrong association, or not the wrong, but it's just too burdensome. It's so much more simple that you have an independent artist doing whatever they do. So there's kind of, I think that there would be a market and a demand, and they might not meet each other, because like I say, the game industry is now reaching the volumes what is music and movies combined. It already surpassed music a few years back, and everybody understands how large the music industry in the world. So a lot of talented people who are doing the mechanics, etc., but the engineers are not good at drawing. So we need artists, burningly so. It's even new market for people like sociologists, but that's not the maybe creative content. Linguistics, who used to be somewhere in the dusty offices, are in the great demand just to understand how the language works to make a good game. And maybe one word about the game, that a lot of people who don't play themselves, the largest growing group segment of gamers are women who are over 40 years old. This might be a surprise fact for you, because the games are so different. You might have a simple tic-tac-toe, or you might have a massive online game where you are creating universes and making very deep moral decisions, whether you will sacrifice yourself, your group, or you will go and destroy the other one. But what I'm saying here, that of course, if I would have a one wish, it would be that we would have a one kiosk where you could go and buy those rights. Music is obviously the nightmare, because in the gaming context, you will always synchronize the music with the moving picture. And that's a type of right that nobody in this world has in one place, not even collecting societies. YouTube doesn't have it. Spotify doesn't even dream of having it. Pricing examples are something that typically in the advertisement, and I happen to know only one public price tag, what would be a benchmark if you go to the court and start defining that what would be the price of infringement. So for one song behind a car advertising, it was £3 million for Led Zeppelin song. And for example, Paul McCartney will never ever let you have a music behind any or as a background for any clip that would have meat in it, because he's a vegetarian. So artists still have these rights, and now when you go to the net and you see all these huge offering there, so unfortunately it's all illegal. If you have your family wedding and you have your favorite song behind it, but you post it online, that's a public performance, and by the way, you are just infringing it. And it would be great that people also, now let's go a bit for the non-commercial side. I think it's a pity that you can't make a collage of your life. A typical teenager want to say that I love these games, I listen to this music, I watch these movies, these are my idols. But if you would do that kind of a work and post that online, you would be breaching quite many laws. And I think you should be able to tell about your world in the online environment. So I will be stopping here, because there are plenty of you and people might have some strict opinions.
Well, straight away, Alfons wants to jump in.
I'm one of the young people that has a few opinions on this. Just briefly, two things. I also have worked for a couple of years now as a UN expert under the Human Rights Council, where the authors' rights are very important. And as it says in the report on artistic freedom, that when the rights are with the individual, and especially the moral rights, this is a human right, and it's non-negotiable. So I do have all the respect for Paul McCartney, even though I like meat myself. And this is an important thing. And the second thing is that when it comes to music in gaming, it's not that difficult. I understand that it has gone to, we have come to a point where you need 100% security that you control the music in the games. Fine. But the rest, when you actually travel with your music, making concerts, this happens all over the world. Why shouldn't the creators have a part in that? It's easy. You register with the collecting society, you have full coverage on your own product, and the rest you will divide with the creator. It's good, it's distributed, and more people will have access to it. So that's my...
I'm probably picking up also on that point a little bit. I think that music is a good example, but it could be generalized. We have an idea of that the on-demand world consists of making a reproduction and of making something available. Reproduction being the inherent necessary part of that in the digital world. But the economic value is attached to making available. That makes the courts in Germany say, well, in principle, if you have two rights being relevant for one economic activity, it should be the right being cleared that is economically relevant, that is on demand, not the reproduction. The reproduction itself, putting something on a server like a film or a piece of music, doesn't make any sense at all. You're not making that reproduction available. So if we want to adapt the copyright regime more to the digital realities and the new formats which are being used, that would be one step to say, let's attach the value to the making available. And then we could escape of something which also we perceive as a problem, that you have two different forms of managing the rights which are today relevant for that. And yesterday the European Commission permitted a merger which is more closely related to the reproduction right, the mechanical rights, and it is in that respect that the rules on collecting societies are not being mandated, because that is not part of the relevant directive, which was adopted almost 2 years ago, which is now for implementation. There we have real difficulties in clearing rights, in obtaining the permissions, and in finding a sort of fair remuneration scale which is really manageable for us. That would be my plea. One point. Let's be more realistic and more clear on what in the digital world really is important.
Okay, you wanted to pick up?
I just wanted to make a comment on what Leena said, and it was also said in the first panel that you are not allowed to quote audiovisual material. I'm not a copyright expert, but I know my copyright law in Sweden. I presume it goes for most of the legislations across Europe and across the world. Of course, you can quote film and music with some limitations, of course. But and the basic condition to quote is that you create your own new work. So these youngsters may very well quote whoever they want to if they create a new work.
In some countries, but for example,
Microphone.
Sorry, I have a loud voice. So yes, in some countries, I would say in Scandinavia, most likely you could, and nobody would come after you. But like I said, that and as a short comment for Alfons is that collecting societies don't have the synchronization rights, so they can't give those to me because artist still has those. So and sometimes artist manager, and that's a dilemma that you have to go pick one by one. What sometimes is doable, but here again, kind of that if you're a small company, this comes quite a burden because there's so much agreements, and for every single agreement, if you don't have a lawyer in house, you go to an attorney, and that's going to cost you. I can say as an example, I used to work for Nokia for 10 years, and my colleagues were doing Nokia's music service next door. I tried to stay away from that mess, and the amount of agreements that was necessary in order to launch that service was over 400.
Well, I will say in relation to the quoting video that even though that was proposed in the Julia Reda report, it was not approved in the committee earlier this week. So at the moment, that's still not a right that is there guaranteed in the InfoSoc directive, but who knows what we will have by the end of the year. Augustin, you wanted a question?
Thank you very much. Just one comment and a question. I agree with you. Well, it's not good for creators. It's not good for consumers. But we have to remind what is not good to creators, especially the small ones, is the lack of bargaining power with the right holders. So it's something that you also have to take into account into the discussion. Then I have a question for Mr. Hansson. I was very interesting hearing that saying that there is no consumer demand for your product in the original language. But if you think that, for example, across the EU, we have more or less 400,000 Swedes living abroad, you know, and we can assume that there are a working population of without means. And if we imagine that they will rent, you know, a movie on a video on demand platform at €4, no, that will mean an increase of €1,600,000. So the question is, wouldn't you like your company to earn this extra money just by lifting a technical restriction.
Yes, of course I would like that, and I would especially like it as a consumer to be able to being possible to access my national material wherever I am. But that's not really the same thing as geo-block or as having a non-territorial setup for the whole business. That's something different. It's what could you say? You define the market being your nationality and not where you physically happen to be at the moment.
Okay, I'll let you,
Just
you want to follow up
a quick-
questions,
quick-
please.
It's not really in relation to your nationality. It's in relation to the people that are willing to consume. Because I took the case of the Swedes, you know, but there also were many people, including myself. I'm a big fan of Swedish culture. You know, I really like it. Although I don't speak yet Swedish, but I hope one day to do it. And I think it's maybe people like me or others, you know, that will be interested and would like to see your stuff, you know, in the original version without necessarily having the need to wait for the adaptation or the subtitling, which is of course an important issue, you know, for make your content known across the EU, and that should continue. This is not about thinking that all your content has to be tailored for a European market. This is not what I'm referring. I'm just referring about being able to simply to access it under the same condition as the locals.
Well, I'm rather amused that we're talking as though VPN tunneling actually doesn't exist. I mean, I was pretty sure.
Again, I think there's a lack of connection with the reality of the way in which content is consumed. Content isn't consumed as individual pieces of content mostly across Europe. It's consumed within services. And you consume that service because you attach value to different bits of the content within that. You know, people may subscribe to Sky Atlantic in the UK because they love Game of Thrones, but they don't watch anything else that's on the channel. And that's absolutely fine. I have to say, I loved Isabel and Fernando. It was a Spanish language production of the creation of the Spanish state, which was on Sky Arts. It was subtitled, it was fantastic. But I didn't ascribe particular value to an individual piece of content. I ascribe value to the fact that I've got access to a channel which is available to me as a consumer of Sky. And I think when we try to talk about what people are demanding and where the value is, we have to understand the way in which content is sold as part of a package, part of a service. The job that we do, whether you're a TV producer, or a distributor, an online distributor, or a publisher, is we curate. That's the key value add in many ways to what we do. It's the curation role of putting together content that we know that our customers are going to want to buy. And I think that where the problem of the cross-border access debate really surfaces itself is that we talk about where things are not accessible and we talk about individual pieces of content. But the reality is that most of that content is accessed in a service. And a service is not likely to be accessible across border because of the different values that are associated with it. So this whole area is immensely complex. I think if we could find a way of not undermining the different value of the different services in the different countries, that allowed for cross-border access in some form that didn't undermine that value, we would begin to unlock some of the cultural aspects of what you want to see. I don't think we would necessarily unlock much economic demand, because ultimately, if there is economic demand, the current licensing framework enables you to put together a service that somebody is likely to want to buy. But I do understand why there may be a sort of cultural and political reason for doing this. But that must not undermine the economics of an industry, which after all is based around taking quite significant risks to create cultural content.
Well, let me just ask, I mean, you haven't mentioned piracy. Does piracy hurt a company like yours? Is it a factor?
Yes, definitely.
Is it on the
it is definitely a factor.
balance sheet?
But I don't think piracy is necessarily related to the cross-border debate. Piracy is free versus pay. Are you prepared to pay for something if you can get it for free? And that is, of course, a big issue. I don't think, though, that we see necessarily that piracy is about availability. It happens It happens where services and where content is available, just as it happens where it's not available.
Okay, we have a couple of, Pierre, we'll let you, but gentleman with the beard there, I have a question. You've been very patient.
Hi, sorry, thank you. Maybe to digress, or maybe to bring it back a little bit, I'm Stephen Turner. I'm from DEMA, the Association of Online Platforms. I had more of a follow-up on what Mr. Hansson was saying before regarding kind of into the debate of user-generated content and the role of consumers kind of becoming more active in the process of creativity. And maybe more of an open question for the panel to see how you view this as maybe a bridging point between the first panel and the second, and maybe also for Bayek as well, to see what kind of how the consumers view themselves as an active, not just as a passive or a user of the content, but actually as a creator of the content. And this also goes into a lot of the financing side as well, where you see where crowdfunding sources and other aspects allow the consumers to actually be a part of a movie or a part of a song or be a part of some kind of artistic creation. I know there's the recent Kung Fury out of Sweden, which even the funders were allowed to be in the film itself. So this kind of takes on a new dynamic and then also creates a little bit of uncertainty around rights and this aspect. I know this could be a whole other panel debate, but just maybe just to hear some views. Thank you.
Yeah, we're ranging broad and wide here. But I see on this side people want to take up this idea of creator-consumer. I mean, is this just about quotation or is it about other more different principles?
First of all, I mean, I often get that question as if creators would have anything against user-generated content. Of course not. I mean, it's great and it's always been there. But it's really a matter of how you use that. If you actually try to gain something out of that, when you publish it yourself, is it a cooperation with the creators? Then you have something interesting for the future. You actually create new originals with that. I was asked about remixes. So what about a remix? Well, remixes are great, but they're often or always made out of originals. I've never heard a remix of a remix of a remix that was very interesting. So fine. And the inspiration for young people to more easily be able to create themselves is fantastic. But it has to be in accordance with the rights of those who have made the originals, obviously. So contact the authors, create new works with them instead of just working in your own room with that. I think there are possibilities for future creativity in that. And there are, of course, ways of remunerating also. There are systems now where you actually are being remunerated as a creator when user-generated content is using some of your music on some of the platforms. Well, let me
play devil's advocate then. You know, you're a 13-year-old, you're in your bedroom, you want to use a bit of music, and you're just doing it for your friends. You think it's a bit of fun. You've used someone's rights-held music to do it, and you're dancing or whatever. I haven't been a 13-year-old girl for a long time, but unbeknownst to you, this goes viral. Everyone sees it on YouTube. It was only for a couple of people. I mean, is it worth criminalizing that young woman because she didn't know how to get hold of the, Mick Jagger or someone to ask her to use the song?
I've never heard any of my colleagues wanting to criminalize or saying that, this girl should go to prison. I've never heard anything like that. But if that girl starts earning billions, maybe there should be some system of the creators themselves actually, being credited, the moral rights once again, and, maybe sharing revenue, working together. She seems to be a brilliant girl, by the way. I mean, going viral in that sense. I would work with her, definitely. I think that would be brilliant.
I mean, this is the challenge, I suppose, for the legislators then as well, that takes this responsibility out of your hands. Okay, Leena.
Just shortly, that we of course have a lot of fan art, and we kind of love it as long as the users, they create their own like totally derivative, and some are crazy and some our artists think is blasphemy, but we nevertheless kind of tolerate it. And I think exactly the limit goes there, that if we kind of try to see that if from the consumer perspective they start to confuse what is the source of it, that they don't understand anymore whether it's ours or theirs, then we might react or ask for credits. And then of course there's a thin line then, that are we talking about piracy, that is somebody starting to make money with that. User-generated content as such, I could speak days about it, because then there are the other things that once when you open a channel for people to upload something, they will upload anything, let's put it nicely that way. So that is a bit of a dilemma, that then you need monitoring, and then you have the IP infringement issues, and that means again that there will be a price tag attached.
You're nodding about the IP infringement issues. This is something that tends to affect your business more, Alexander. I mean, are you then going to be the police? Are you going to be the judge and jury?
Sure. All of those roles we will assume in one single instance. I think that also adds to the point where I said let's be more realistic about digital realities. There's not much you can do about things like illegal hosting in a country outside the EU if you are a provider who is not active there. If your network is being construed in a way that it should deliver in either direction the fastest possible way, you will not install checking points, you will not enter into deep packet inspection or whatever, and you will certainly try to manage the interfaces with other networks in a most efficient manner. Of course, this is also more obvious in the mobile environment where you have to be realistic as well. So I don't think that we could add much to that. I think courts have realized that, also the ECJ. And we will, of course, if some court still says, like in Germany, it might come up a case in a couple of months, you have to block access by blocking the URL or the DNS, whatever, to a certain website. We will do that. We will have to follow, but we will still try to argue and hope that we will be listened to, that this is nonsense, just to quote. The qualification you added to another argument earlier on.
Well, yes, that you may quote me back as saying things are nonsense, but actually we in the UK are the second largest internet access provider, and we have a system for a court requiring an access provider to block access to an infringing website, and I have to say it works extremely well.
No.
I'm sure we're all familiar with the Pirate Bay. I mean, it goes down and there's two more the next day. I mean,
well, no, actually, because what it does is it frustrates the monetization of content, and it makes them. I mean, these sites exist on the basis that they are essentially marketing organisations, and they're marketing their availability. If you block access, they have to put an awful lot of effort into establishing themselves somewhere else, and their ability to market to that site then has to be ramped up again. And actually, we have seen an impact. It works incredibly well. It's judge-led. All of the internet service providers have cooperated in the process. We have a body of case law, and personally, I think it's a very good model for the rest of Europe.
I just said no, because in my opinion you are referring now to something different than I was talking about. You're referring to the follow the money approach. Yes, you quoted those people financing these services and rendering the money which is necessary. Your colleagues from Germany, with whom we have been discussing for about a year on the technical realities that I quoted, have told us that it's a matter of 5 to 10 minutes to have an illegal streaming source moved from one host provider to another host provider, and that the, let's say, the advertising agencies, the electronic agencies behind that, which are rendering that service to be monetizable, follow that, so that it is decoupled from the kind of service that you offer as an illegal hoster of streaming. That is the kind of things where I doubt that this is meaningful in the future.
I can see by people's faces you've rather split the room here as well as splitting the panel. I'm going to use my prerogative as moderator and ask people to show their hands. Who agrees with David that it's very effective, just blocking a site is very effective? Okay. And who agrees with Alex? It's almost 50-50. It really is. Okay, I think we'll move on from this debate. We have a question here and then another lady here. We have 3 questions. Gentleman who has the mic first.
Hello. Oh, hi. Really, I wanted to come back on one of the points on the UGC conversation that happened a little while ago. To me, it felt like there was some confusion in the delineation between commercial rights and moral rights. Absolutely, I agree with Alfons, your comments earlier about respecting Paul McCartney's moral rights in that example. In the panel example given of a young girl who uploads a song and has the music in the background, there are already systems in place, and many rights holders monetize those rights through YouTube's Content ID service, which I understand is improving. For me, the big problem in the system is one that Alfons mentioned earlier, which is the interruptions to the value chain and people that maintain an interest in rights as they progress through the value chain. You asked about a fair trade initiative. In fact, there are two. On the composer side, there is an initiative started in Canada and the United States called Fair Trade Music, and here in so we, and in Europe as well, we have the Fair Internet for Performers campaign, which is looking at exactly the issues that arise out of the making available right and its use in current context. I wonder if the panel has any views on, going back to what was the earlier panel, one of the points in the earlier panel was the potential devaluation of content through the idea that it's available in some kind of fungible way.
Okay. Well, while you think about that, there's a lady with short hair here and a gentleman in the blue shirt. But this lady has been very patient. She's had her hand up for ages.
Thank you. My name is Nicola Frank. I represent the European Broadcasting Union. Several of the speakers earlier mentioned licensing problems, efficient licensing of rights, so for the broadcasting world, there have been rules in place actually for a number of years. Actually, there's a famous Cable and Satellite Directive from 1993. Which made it possible really to European content or national content to travel to other countries, notably on cable networks. You have a lot of foreign channels available already. That works very well. And this was possible due to the rules established in this directive. Now, for me, the question, or there are two questions actually, maybe also to Alexander Scheuer from Deutsche Telekom. These rules at the time were established for cable networks only, and we think, and would you agree, that these rules should be extended to IPTV platforms because it's a similar sort of business model that could probably ease sort of the licensing process around these channels. And then, and that is a connected question, what about the online services of broadcasters or the on-demand services of broadcasters? All our members, public service broadcasters, offer what we call catch-up TV, like in the UK, the iPlayer or others, and they have them all. And when you have the sort of the traditional television channel on such a platform like cable or IPTV, users would also like to have access to the catch-up service, but there is not a very good licensing system in place, and there would be a possibility to extend the rules which exist for traditional television also to these on-demand users for the broadcasters' on-demand services. So are there any views there in the panel?
Well, we're waiting on views from the Commission on this. There is a platform investigation already taking place. So we probably won't sort it out here, but Alexander first, and then we'll hear from David.
Thank you. One of the views of the Commission which has already materialized was the rebirth of the Cable and Satellite Directive in the digital single market communication at a very late stage of the development of that document, which I think was a very good development at last minute. I'm tempted to say I couldn't agree more with Nicola. I have an understanding of the cable regime in the directive, which is almost technologically neutral, because it also included microwave systems, and the cable system is described, to my understanding, against the background of international law, which is to be understood in a more dynamic way than it is handled in some of the countries today. I could say easily, yes, of course, IPTV is not different in any respect to cable, so we are already included with that kind of services that we offer, but for OTT, for webcasting, that is different because that is our competitors. I'm not saying that, but might be close to this one. The basic idea which I want to underline is you have a system in place which works mostly, but is it the right regime you want to put forward for the future? Will you be, as Nicola said, will you be looking only into the original transmission of a program, or will you be fair enough to say what consumers want are new functionalities, and as long as these new functionalities are very closely related to the Broadcasting Act, these functionalities should be covered by the cable regime as well. That might be catch-up, That might be what we have, or what we are trying to introduce, which is called instant restart. As long as a program is still running, you can rewind to the very beginning and start from there. Yeah, that might be new functionalities which people expect to have, because they see that on other platforms in the OTT environment. There, it seems to be the most natural thing to have these kind of functionalities. Just one last remark. It was referred to the US, and that platforms from the US wouldn't have a different regime or a more easy regime for their activities. You don't have to go that far. You just have to go to Switzerland, for example, which is also in Europe, not part of the EU, where some of those rights which are deemed necessary for the functionalities are managed by collecting societies. So they are available, so the function is available, and that kind of platform is one which we have to compete with. So we are asking for a more level playing field in this regard.
Okay, well, I'm going to come back to this issue of future-proofing, but first, Janneke, if you want to respond.
Yeah, sure. I think it's definitely an interesting development to see the CAPSAT directive in the DSM. And I think what's important to realize, though, is that a catch-up service or a TV-like service is basically a secondary act of making that work available, whereas for an OTT service, it's the first time that you're communicating the work to the public, for which we would like to take out a direct license for all the audiences where we choose to transmit the content, which is, of course, a huge difference. And I can see that there's the gray areas where you say this is simulcasting, this is broadcast-like, but that's a very different situation from OTT. Then again, we are also looking at it for music licensing, which is where we do secondary transmission to the public, so we are looking at the options that you have there, but legally it's a very different situation that I think you cannot copy one-on-one, because it's such a different business model where we basically transmit the rights to the public for the first time.
I would agree with that. I can understand why the Commission has flagged it, because in a sense, if you think about the debate around portability and cross-border, that really is a very narrowly focused debate on pay services, and they are looking at how to deal with the free-to-airs. I've never really understood why it's in the interests of free-to-airs to do this from an economic point of view, because if you're advertising funded, really it's very difficult to monetize these services in third countries. But I do agree that I'm not sure that CAPSAT, which has a very specific purpose, is really transmutable to the internet world. But it's worth looking at, and we'll all engage. I think what will be important is that it should still be the decision of the broadcaster whether or not they want to see their broadcast being utilised in this way. It shouldn't be the right of somebody to come along and say, we're going to take your signal and we're going to distribute it as we see fit. I think that would be really quite damaging to the entire market.
Okay, gentleman here with the blue shirt had a question.
Yeah, my name's Manas Hanratty. I guess I'm just a consumer, because I don't represent any of the stakeholders that are here, all sort of selling their positions and so on. Consumers are very simple people. They want the best, right? And you might call it piracy. They just call it the best offer that's out there at any one time. If you want to really get any idea of what to do better in your product, look at what the pirates are doing and then see, can you do something similar, okay? The business is very, very competitive, and I mean, I know the likes of Netflix know very well that tomorrow morning there could be a new Netflix that'll just put you out of business. That's just the nature of the world we live in. All I'm really trying to say here is don't forget the consumer. I've heard a lot of people say, oh yeah, the consumer's number one and so on, but all I've really heard is everybody talking about their positions in their particular companies. You really need to remember the consumer decides everything for you. And if you have a high level of piracy related to your particular business, you should just look at why that is, rather than bring them to court or doing blocking. All that, none of that works. We'll just find another way. So sorry about that.
Okay, well, that's the elephant in the room. Pierre, you want to respond?
I would like to argue that by some aspects, the music industry and the book industry today on the digital world might understand better the consumers than other industries, because if you're in music like Spotify, or if you're in books like, let's say, Amazon, or on comics like we are, we have the largest possible catalog. We have no territorial barriers. We roughly play around the same price, either for premium service or for fee of service buying. So where is the competition? The competition is essentially in understanding the needs of the consumer. Of course, every industry wants to understand the need of the consumer, but they have other aspects on which they can compete. We can compete only on this, because anything we do, Amazon or other platform will do it. They have the same price, the same catalogs. So I think user experience. Yesterday I asked this question to Stefan from Spotify in the hall, and his answer was clear. It was listening to the consumer, understanding his needs, and being the best at user experience. Hence, the points that I raised a few minutes ago when I said issues like the right to lend digital products is very important from the consumer point of view. And I would say the right to quote, providing it's a fair quote and it's limited and et cetera, et cetera. It's the same for lending. All this is technologically very easy to implement. It's very, very important. I'm not asking that it's being regulated by the Commission, it should be discussed with the authors, et cetera, et cetera. But it lies in front of us, because that's where the consumer wants. That's the kind of things they want. And it's the kind of things that's in the interest of the business. As you said, what's good for the consumer is good for the authors. If consumers can quote, if they can lend to friends in limited volume, but if they can do it like they would do in the physical world, it will enhance the market as a whole. So I think that in the book and music industry, we're really working specifically on that.
Yeah, I mentioned in the first panel that change has never been as slow, or change will never be as slow as it has been. And from one angle, we talked about the consumers and their expectations. And we talked about these barriers when it comes to accessing content wherever you are. But let's just imagine that players could get access to content by simply, because across Europe, same content everywhere. I mean, Netflix has worked around it by regardless of which Netflix market you're in, you have access to the content that is regulated or available in that market. But would it actually be possible going forward if what would for example Netflix do when you could buy all the content at the same time? Would we actually achieve a Spotify, or would we achieve something else? What sort of...
Well, if you could buy all the content at the same time, and we think people in many markets would be interested in seeing all that content in that market, then I think obviously the answer would be yes. And I think when it comes to the traveling subscriber, where you can, when you have a Dutch subscription, you go to France, you can see the French catalog. There's a large overlap, so you have a good chance that if you like one of the more Netflix series like Orange is the New Black, that you can continue watching because it's similar across the catalogs. Then yes, and I think that for a large part is meeting these portability requirements. But I think, I mean, if you would have a hypothesis like that, you are basically questioning for another panel the whole idea of having an exclusive license for a specific period of time for specific content, which is not something that I see to change very soon. But then again, you say change will never be this slow. So I'd be interested to think if you would think it's realistic that that is actually going to change anytime soon.
Well, we don't know, and none of us have a crystal ball. Least of all, of course, the Commission or the Parliament or the Council. And I'm wondering, we're talking about speed here. I mean, the last InfoSoc directive was 2001. Mark Zuckerberg was 14 years old or something. So if we get, you know, maybe in the next sort of 3 or 4 years we will have a new piece of legislation on the table. Are you happy that you won't be coming back and we'll having all these same arguments again in another 5 years after that? No one?
Let me just say that I was a bit scared earlier today when all of these piracy issues and the way we discussed them kind of felt a bit old-fashioned, actually. We've been through it. I don't know if it's because I'm from Sweden and we were quite early in adopting both piracy and actually getting rid of at least the pirate party and a lot of... And the consumers, once again, they're not very interested in a service that has bad quality, you can't find what you want, a lot of porn violence, and no one gets paid for it. I mean, that wouldn't be the business that I would start right now if I wanted to. So I do believe, I have trust in consumers, but I think it's very important that we, the stakeholders, key policymakers, need to discuss this, and I think that we need to get closer together in this value chain that I've been talking to about. And I think the solution is having a bit more respect, I think, for the other parts in the industries in order to have long-term sustainable models. I think that's the solution. So hopefully, I'll be glad to come back and talk about something else next time.
Okay, well, let's see.
I suspect that we will be having this argument because the market will change pretty rapidly, but some things will stay the same. So the curated model is always going to be one that people are prepared to pay for. That curation may be less and less done by people sitting in an office and deciding what people watch, and more done by algorithm and your behavior. But nevertheless, that ability to bring together in one place all the kinds of content that people want to watch is, I think, going to have long-term economic value. And I think that we will see different services emerge over time. I suspect also that the people sitting along here will still be here arguing over it because it's our job in the end. And the Commission will be trying to understand how best to deliver an economic outcome for Europe and for its citizens. But they, you know, the fact is, and I go back to what I said earlier, I think we have to remember just what a dynamic industry we do actually have in Europe. And the fact that Netflix has been able to establish itself, and yet there are still very successful European businesses competing, and that piracy has not destroyed our businesses, suggests that we are doing some things right, and we are responding to you consumers in a way that's encouraging you to pay and pay more for content.
Okay, there was a gentleman in a red tie. Someone down here had a question. No?
Thank you. I'm Olaf Stockman from IFRA. And by the way, I do agree. And I think that it will not necessarily take 5 years before we are back, probably shorter than that. The fundamental principles of copyright have been there since the 5th century. And we have discussed them each time that there is something new. But they still keep on coming back, and we'll still keep on discussing them. My question was actually to ask Pierre to clarify a little bit on the lending, because I think that that's a very topical issue, and lending has come up in different contexts, and there are two different ways of thinking about lending. We hear more and more that people say or some institutions say that we would want to have the right to lend and an exception without an obligation to take up a license, without an obligation to pay any remuneration. And then on the other hand, we know that lending is the business model of the publishing industry in the digital environment. You don't sell products anymore, like you say, Mr. Winden. We sell services, we sell access. And now in the United States, nearly all the libraries, they do lending, but on the basis of contracts with publishers or collectives. In Sweden, all the libraries, they do lending, but on the basis of contracts. They have done this since they started this 15 years back. Denmark, Norway, more than 2,000 libraries in Sweden. So could you clarify what you mean by lending? Is this lending as a part of the business model on the basis of agreements with creators and publishers, or do you mean lending in addition to that? Thanks.
Definitely, lending can only be in agreement with publishers and creators. I was referring to two types of lending. One is lending by consumers themselves. They buy the right to access to some content and they appreciate it and they want to lend it to a friend. It's technically feasible. It's feasible that it cannot be relent and it's just limited for a period of time. And I think this needs to be discussed with publishers and with authors. I'm not an expert in legal issues, but I understand it's quite in par with legal issues. On the other hand, there is lending by institution, which is very important also, and it's the question of libraries. And one non-negligible part of our own business is to sell to libraries the right to lend to their users books. And we do it inside the libraries, and we're going to do it outside the walls before the end of the year. It's always in agreement with publishers and with authors. So on this point, what I want to stress is we as startups, we try to do these kind of things, and I think that it can work very well because we carry the value chain of publishers and authors. So authors will get revenues from this from a normal point, just like if we sell to end user in a different percentage, but still.
Okay, you wanted to come back to an earlier
Yeah,
point.
I wanted to make sure that I understood you correctly. Was your basic assumption we will having in short term a reform and then discuss the next reform in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
Okay. Quite optimistic view to my mind. Let's hope.
I'm imagining a high-speed world where things don't.
Let's just hope until the end of the mandate of this commission that the council and the parliament, as the co-legislators, as they are called, will have managed to come up with a reasonable, probably far-reaching than just narrow reform of what we are talking about, and that this is already a significant step into ending in the digital world. With the concepts which stem from a different world. That would be, to my mind, already some achievement, and then we would have time again to reiterate the arguments which we reiterated also this.
In an ideal world, this would all happen, but I know we don't live in an ideal world. There was a question down here at the back.
Yes, my name is Ulda Zariņš from National Library of Latvia, and for obvious reasons I cannot really agree with the opinion of Mr. Ralman and Mr. Stockmo. And we know that libraries are doing e-lending and they are doing on contractual basis, but it unfortunately includes also the right to refuse license, which publishers often do, unfortunately. And we definitely agree that it has to be made in a sensible way so that rights holders are receiving some remuneration for lending in libraries, as it is being done with physical books with public lending right. So there is a remuneration, and well, I cannot really agree that libraries are handicapped when they are dealing with digital materials compared to physical materials. That I see it deteriorates their public service mission, and it's really not good for anybody, both publishers, authors, and library consumers as well.
Okay, well, at this point, if you see the program in front of you, it says conclusion. Now, I don't know if anybody else wants to try and do that job, because there has been a conclusion isn't a consensus, and that's fortunate in this case. So I think if I'm summing it up, we've heard an awful lot the consumer wants to pay, the consumer sort of is driving demand for the products the consumer wants, and on this panel everyone's very happy to serve the consumer, and yet still we have vast differing perspectives on what makes a digital single market for creative content. So does anyone here want to sum up, give a conclusion before we close? Yeah.
I can give you one sentence. I mean, as creators, we want a strong digital single market, no doubt about it. And curation might be the key, but it's very important that this curation does not instead become, gatekeepers, where it's easier to have the whole territory with a certain part of the repertoire. And in that case, then we're losing out as the EU, because it's the diversity that makes us strong.
Okay.
Just to say, I challenge that slightly, in as much as the owners of content are the ones who are going to be the big winners from the value chain going forwards. As the number of platforms proliferates, and the ways in which content can be distributed to consumers, if you own content, you are in the sweet spot. Everybody get into that business. That's what you want to be in.
Anyone else? Leena? If you own content, you're in the sweet spot.
Well, that sounds lovely. We do own content, but I'm still afraid that we are not in the sweet spot. The one thing is that the value chains, specifically across borders, are sometimes meaning that you have so many people sharing that one single piece of cake that there's nothing left for you anymore. I mean, the percentages sometimes sound very modest. I mean, you have 1.5, 2.5, but if you have 100 of those, you don't have business case anymore. One kind of a word about the legislation and regulation, a kind of single market, is that I think it's rather obvious. I mean, if you go downtown there to the Latvian outside market, that's a single market. If you can buy everything from one place without like going across fences or locked doors or anything. And I've sometimes said that if the department stores would be functioning the same way as online digital stores, nobody would go there. If I would need to show the ID at the door and sign the declaration that I understand if I don't pay at the cashier I will be stealing, and everybody would be checked in and out, it would be very, very burdensome. And here I would be saying, even though this might be a bit dangerous coming from the company myself, that companies are a bit afraid of taking that risk. The department stores understand that the risk of running that business is that there's a certain percentage of shoplifting, but that's a part of the business and you do reasonable amounts to stop it, but you understand it will never be zero. But I'm afraid in the online world there's kind of a zero tolerance, but of course because the possible risks are so huge, so you do anything to avoid them, but then of course if you do nothing, there's no, you don't have to be afraid that you will lose, but there will be no business either.
Okay, well, to mention a correlation between shoplifting, we all know what those self-scanners in supermarkets are like, and actually the theft and pilfering went down when you allowed people their own autonomy to pay or not pay. So I think unless any of our remaining panelists have something to add, it's not a consensus, but it is a consumer conclusion. Okay, if we can give you... I will have the last word, but we will let you have a word with the microphone.
Real quick, I don't need the microphone. Really quickly.
It's being recorded and live streamed.
Okay, real quick.
For technical reasons.
The current mantra that the consumer hears everywhere, regardless of which company we're talking about, we only hear the really good stuff, right? And what we're hearing now is anytime, anywhere, anyhow, anywho, and so on. And that's what we want with our content. We don't really care whether you use words like curation or not or whatever. We just expect it anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And if that means you have to figure out all the border stuff, you just have to do it. And if you make it expensive in one country and cheap in another, we might like it for a while, but if we find an easy way to get it cheaper, we might just be tempted, okay? So don't ever think that consumers are stupid, because we're not. We're actually getting more sophisticated every day.
Okay. Oh, and you've just started the whole discussion again. Okay.
I was just watching the tweet saying that e-lending is possible and should be encouraged. Yes, but only if it's encouraged as a business, not as an exception of free rights that would allow, I don't know, libraries or other to dispatch the content. It has to keep the value chain. That's very important.
If you have to remunerate, it's not free riding.
Yeah.
Can I just say something good about the consumers after this? Because, of course, cheap might be important. It might be the most important thing, but not for all consumers. There are other values. There are values about freedom of speech, about artistic freedom, and about having a diversity in content, quality. You have a lot of these things, and I know that I agree with you. Consumers are not stupid, and they want more than just having something cheap.
Okay, thank you. We will leave that. Let's make this round of applause for the whole panel and include everyone who was here earlier today as well. Thank you very much, everyone.